in the series of generalist social work practice video lectures. Today we're going to spend some time talking about planning, implementation, brokering, case management, evaluation, follow-up in special populations. So basically today we're looking at the heart and soul, the meat and potatoes, if you will, of social work practice. And so we're going to spend a little time walking through these slides and really having some discussion about what all of these things mean. But again, this is no substitute for your reading, so we would expect that you come to class prepared, having read, and be ready to participate in the in-class activities, which highlight and will help continue to foster your understanding of these particular concepts. So without any further ado, let's move into our discussion for today. When we're thinking about planning, and as you remember from the generalist practice, we have 6 steps or things that we do in terms of our process for how we actually work with families. The engagement, the assessment, and the third step, which really is the planning as we move through the rest of those particular steps as we work with our clients. So these are 8 things that you're going to need to be able to do when you're working with and planning at the micro level. So the old notion about meeting your clients where they're at is a very important piece around starting to work with your clients. Being able to take the information that you gathered from your assessment and start to then prioritize the problems, translating these problems into actual needs, selecting a strategy for how you're going to move forward, establishing goals, strength-based goals with your actual client, specifying what those objectives needs to be, the action steps, and then formalizing the actual treatment plan. Those are the aspects of the work that you would need to do and when you're starting to do the planning at the micro level. When we think about planning at the meso level, and we're doing meso practice, this really relates to groups or organizations as a whole. And so when you're thinking about, and as you matriculate through the social work with groups intervention course, this gives you some idea of what we're looking at. So think about that particular clientele as being your group, and knowing that you'll have to clarify your goals and objectives. When you're in organizations, you'll have to really look at getting input from the clients who are receiving the services as well as the workers who are conveying them, identifying the goals, and then finally looking at entering into contracts with all of the folks that are involved here. So meso practice is a little bit of a wider scope, but some of the same principles actually apply in terms of how you would move forth in terms of the planning for that particular setting. Case management is really, again, the heart, soul, bread and butter of social work practice. As a matter of fact, you will do a lot of this in the scope of the work, almost irregardless to what type of social work practice you find yourself in. This is just a standby. And so as you look at the definition here of case management, and think about as you get ready to move into your field placements in the spring and then again in the fall, there's a high emphasis and an expectation, at least especially in your senior internship, to actually do actual case management with clients. So again, these are the things that will be motivating you in terms of what it is you're doing as you are working and providing those services. And so this is what social workers do. They coordinate, they monitor, they evaluate, they advocate, and they make sure that there are specific resources that are identified for those particular clients. Sometimes they can be as simple as really looking at how to improve social networks, or giving people knowledge or empowering them to actually locate some of those resources on their own long after the intervention with you or the work with you has gone past. So again, case management, a very important aspect of the work that we do as social workers. I skipped past a couple here. So let's go back to brokering. And so we've looked at the case management aspects, which really kind of looks at pulling the plan together. And the brokering is the next step as it relates to that particular plan. It's about linking client systems with those needed resources. So often you, in the context of the work that you do with your agency, will have a fairly finite approach to how you are working with that client. And so there may be resources or there may be actual needs and problems that are outside of the scope of your agency to actually resolve with clients. And so then it's about making sure that there are appropriate referrals that are made to other parts of the system and linking everyone together so that things can get actually dealt with in a meaningful way. For example, if you're working with a family and you're dealing with some family counseling and you've got a member of the family who has some active chemical dependency, then referring that person to an actual treatment center that actually specializes in working with folks, it might be a part of that particular plan to restore functioning for that particular family. So it's your job as a social worker to become very knowledgeable about the resources in your area. And good brokers know agencies, they learn contact folks, and they actually just have a list or resources that they can access as needed to make sure that clients are given the information that they need to move forward. The implementation. So if you've been following, we've planned, we've looked at establishing goals and objectives, we've defined case management activities, we talked a little bit about brokering, and so now the implementation is actually moving forward, signing on the dotted line on the treatment plan with everything set up and ready to go. So it's the actual doing of the social work. And so again, designed to either alleviate problems that are current and to prevent problems in the future is what the implementation piece is all about. Evaluation and follow-up. And so as we now have implemented this particular plan, we need to be monitoring to make sure that the goals are being met, objectives are being achieved, and to actually adjust if they are not. And so the evaluation gives us this particular ability to know whether it was a worthwhile endeavor. So did all the things that we planned and the resources that we put in place work, or did they not work? And you gauge that by the success of the client in terms of meeting the goals that have been anticipated. And so it's a very important aspect of social work, and it relates directly to our core competencies number 9 and 10 that really start to look at all of the context items out there that actually start to shape practice. So looking at those things. And also item number 10. And so we'll spend quite a bit of time in future classes really talking more specifically about those 10 core social work competencies and how they're demonstrated. We spend quite a bit of time in field doing that. But again, in your work with client families, the evaluation is going to be very important because we need to not do things because we think that they're a good idea. We need to do things because they actually work and show promise. Evaluation happens at different levels, and so we know and understand at the micro level, it's really whether the client's needs were met or not. Was the client successful? What were the outcomes that were achieved? What were the behaviors that have been rectified as a result of the intervention that we did? When we're looking at meso, we're really looking at the group process. And so if we're in a small agency and we're looking at revamping how we deliver services, we plan, we strategize, and now we're looking to see whether those changes that we've made in terms of the organization and how we deliver services, have they made any impact that we expected them to make, and are clients getting what they need from it? And when we think about macro, we're looking at an even larger scope. And so we're looking at law, we're looking at social policies that are coming from various forms of government or from larger corporations to really get a sense of whether the policies as they are written, do they actually identify and successfully lead to problem resolution in the micro and meso levels as we start to explore it out. And so really making sure that policy does what it says it's going to do without consequences for the clients that we find ourselves working with. Termination is this planned process where we look at, so how do we know when we got to where we're going? When do we decide to terminate services? And we need to look at a number of different things as we're making that decision. We need to evaluate objectives. We need to look at whether progress has been achieved and maintained and whether it continues. We need to also prepare for the emotional reaction from our clients who may have a hard time with us closing the case, as well as you yourself as a practitioner having some difficulty in terms of resolving those issues and making sure that appropriate referrals beyond the scope of the service that you're able to provide are actually there. So the termination piece is a very important piece of social work practice that we need to become familiar with and that we need to understand because we are only involved with the families for a designated short period of time. And the idea is to empower and to educate them in ways that help them access and resolve some of their own issues without having help from systems or social workers. So that's the ultimate goal. As we move back here to follow up, and then after we have done the termination, after a specified period of time, depending on your agency and depending on the services that you deliver, there may be the need for follow up and really to take a look at how well the agency did in terms of the services that they provide, whether things are back on track and are continuing to be on track for the clients that we provided the service for. Are they still successful? Are they still, for example, if you were working as a social worker and your goal was to look at establishing meaningful employment and having people get jobs, maybe we'll check back in 3 to 4 months to see whether you're actually working, whether you're still at that particular job, and things of that particular nature. So really a way to just kind of follow up to make the determination about service to the client as well as whether the client improvement has continued. And also it will vary depending on the agencies that you're in. So for example, in some agencies where there's crisis work, then there may not be that follow-up piece because the nature of the work in terms of the crisis is simply to resolve the crisis and to pass that information or to pass the referral on to the next agency if there's even a need for that. So follow-up will vary depending on the types of agencies you're in and the things that you're actually doing with your clients. And then finally, special populations. And so as we think about gender sensitive issues, as we think about, for example, if you were a social worker and you were providing services to a woman who has been domestically abused or the victim of a sexual assault, then we need to be able to take into account the gender sensitivity that needs to be looked at as it relates to how we provide services for that population. So we still do the planning, we still do the engagement, we still look at the treatment plans, objectives, the brokering, but we're looking at it through the lens of what this particular client needs based on that particular gender. Feminist counseling might be a good example of what we might do when we've got situations like that. Also recognizing that the disabled population may have some special needs or will have some special needs. So it's about then how do you gauge all of the things that we talked about earlier in this video presentation to make sure that it meets the needs of your disabled clients. Communities of color, whether they are recently immigrated to this country or whether they have been here for hundreds of years, recognizing that there is a difference in terms of how you enter and how you connect with and how you work with these particular communities. Really understanding and having some degree of cultural responsiveness to recognize that you need to do things differently when you're working in communities that are different than your own. So recognizing these things and also making sure that those are front and center as you are planning your objectives and you're looking at case management for those particular populations, as well as the LGBTQ community as well. So when we're looking at issues around same-sex couples and some of the difficulties that they may encounter in terms of their walk, making sure that we are recognizing and acknowledging that and making sure that we're making appropriate referrals for services for organizations that are skilled in terms of working with those particular communities. So these are all things that you will need to keep in mind and keep at the forefront as you are engaging and continuing to do your work in case management with the clients that you actually have. And so this is bringing to a close my portion of the video lecture. And again, I would encourage you to continue to do your readings as this is very important because this is the meat and the potatoes. So all of the other coursework that you've done, looking at how you integrate those particular things into this particular aspect of the work in terms of your planning and your actual on-the-ground work with clientele. So again, come to class prepared. As always, we wish you well, and we'll see you in class.